Ghost in the Shell occupies a very strange place in the history of the American consumption of Japanese entertainment media. It's not as universally recognizable as the works of Studio Ghibli, and it can't claim to have started the whole craze because that was almost certainly Akira's doing. It never reached One Piece levels of saturation, even when it was at the peak of its popularity, and you could reasonably say that the entire franchise has been mostly dormant since Second Gig ended back in 2005. As for what we got, it's definitely a mixed bag. The original 1995 movie was basically an hour-long cop drama followed by a 20-minute lecture on AI ethics, but it was still about as good as it could have been. The sequel is complete fucking nonsense, where every other scene is basically the architect scene from Matrix Revolutions. Standalone Complex was fine, and I can't really vouch for the new stuff because I haven't seen it. So it's good, yes, but it's far from a classic. The point is, Ghost in the Shell is nowhere near untouchable, and it's perfectly reasonable for something like this to eventually come out of it. The live-action remake has been met with more needless controversy, proving once again that not even the slightest shred of popular culture, no matter how niche, can avoid being rung at the forefront of the public image by the same short-sighted entitled idiots whose intentions will inevitably be undermined by the amount of marketable attention they're providing to the very thing they've wasted an absurd amount of time attempting to somehow will from existence, all without costing studio marketing departments a fucking dime. But let's start with the positives, yeah? The one thing that the promotional material for Ghost in the Shell made abundantly clear is that regardless of the actual quality of the movie, the aesthetic would be really, really cool. And boy did this movie ever look fucking cool. The gritty, postmodern, wired cyberpunk metropolis resting its laurels on the poor and downtrodden is nothing new, but it never ceases to be fascinating when projected through modern special effects, and it truly looks like the world in which Ghost in the Shell would take place. The lineup of characters is fully realized, and everybody looks and sounds the part. The dynamic between the various members of Section 9 is both highly reminiscent of the original as well as being compelling in its own right, and there are enough character and story-specific references to imply that the filmmakers were somewhat familiar with the source material and knew to at least a certain extent what the fuck they were doing. So we've got a nearly flawless recreation of the Ghost in the Shell universe in live action, used to tell the most average, uneventful, bland, predictable, and inconsequential story they could possibly come up with. The actual plot is more or less a mashup of the stories from the first two movies, which seems promising at first, an opportunity to piece together the best parts of both while eschewing the veritable textbook's worth of deep lore masquerading as an insightful look at the world during the burgeoning era of the internet, which in this day and age only serves to date the original films beyond recognition. It would therefore make sense for a Ghost in the Shell made in 2017 to not explore the same themes as a Ghost in the Shell that came out over 20 years ago. For those among us arguing that the philosophical spine of the original has somehow been lost in this modern adaptation. Thematic exploration isn't gone completely, but it's less of a spine now and more of one of those tiny bones that are in your ear. You see, the story is composed of the manhunt tone from the first movie, but instead of an amorphous digital entity, it's just a bad corporation doing bad corporation things like an Innocence. Oh, and also the bad guy from Second Gig shows up to generally be non-threatening and force Scarlett Johansson to unenthusiastically confront her humanity in the movie's flaccid attempt to have a point about public identity and personal privacy in the internet age, which ultimately doesn't go anywhere. Speaking of Scarlett Johansson, her portrayal of the Major is, well, alright, I guess. Her delivery is distant and robotic, which makes a little bit of sense because she is, playing a robot. The writing doesn't do her a whole lot of justice since it's weighed down by needless backstory details that only really serve to make the movie longer. It makes you wonder why they didn't just leave these details in and just assume they were an acceptable part of the environment. I mean, they did it with the spider tank, so why exactly do we need to know what happened to Batu's eyes? If I had to describe the whole movie in a single phrase, it's that it honestly could have been worse. The directing is fine, the cinematography is fine, the script is fine, but seeing actors deliver the lines instead of animation sync to it really emphasizes how clumsy it sounds to have to use the words ghost and shell in basically every scene. The acting is fine, and hey, it's always cool to see Beat Takeshi and stuff. The movie looks great and sounds great, but it doesn't make constructive use of anything on its plate. It's the textbook definition of average, neither particularly good nor particularly bad, and I don't really know what else to say besides that, so I won't.